One question I get all the time is, Tim, why do treble clef and bass clef not have the same notes? And after some investigation, I came across a logical answer, which I'm going to share with you in this video. Before I can answer why both clefs don't have the same notes, I want to try to explain why there's a bass clef and treble clef to begin with. And a lot of this is going to have to do with instrument ranges, since there's lower pitched instruments, ones that are pitched in the middle, and then higher pitched instruments. For example, tuba plays from this note to this note. Trombone plays from this note to this note. And flute, which is a higher pitched instrument, plays from this note to this note. And things like piano have an enormous range going from this note to this note. So to articulate why bass clef and treble clef exist is that it's a standardized way to read music across multiple instruments, lower pitched instruments, medium pitched instruments, and high pitched instruments, or like the piano, like a full pitch range of spectrum, and placing them into one or two categories, bass clef or treble clef, or in the piano's case, unfortunately for you, reading both clefs. Now, there's still the main question today, which is, why are the notes different between each clef? For instance, the bass clef, the lines are G, B, D, F, A from the bottom to the top, but the lines of the treble clef are E, G, B, D, F. So what gives? A lot of this answer has to do with the note's position in relation to middle C. On the piano, middle C is right here, pretty much right in the middle of the piano. And the right hand, where your hand is normally positioned here, plays from middle C up in this direction. It can play a little bit down in this direction, but 99% of your notes are going to be here and up. With the bass clef, your left hand is actually down towards the lower end of the piano, and so you're going to be playing basically from middle C down that way. Again, you can play some bass clef notes in the treble area or in that middle area, but that's not very common. Now, the real answer is where middle C is on the staff. So for treble clef, middle C is going to be right here on what we call a ledger line directly below the staff. It starts from the middle of the piano, and then the lines of the treble clef begin E, G, B, D, F, going up that way. Now, what does it look like for the bass clef? It's on a ledger line directly above the staff, and it kind of makes sense since your left hand is going to be playing from here, and then the lines of the bass clef begin in reverse order since we're going down this time. A, F, D, B, G. Notice how this creates a nice even distribution of notes around the center of the piano, with the treble clef going up and the bass clef going down. Now, you can have notes lower and higher than the top line or the bottom line, but for the most part, you're going to be playing in the middle here. Now, one question I'm probably going to get is, even though these are the exact same note on the piano, middle C, why is there a space between them on the staff? Why don't they just join together at one single note and not have that space in between them? That kind of makes things more confusing, right? Now, say our treble clef note is way up here, and the composer wants the rest of the notes more towards the middle of the piano here. Well, to accomplish this, you're going to have to move above middle C into kind of the treble clef territory. So you need that space between the clefs, because if you didn't have them, that E would actually be like coming into the treble clef territory, and that would actually make things a lot more complicated. Now, to drive this all home, we need to answer just one more question, and that is, what if both clefs did have the same notes? You know, say the treble clef lines are E, G, B, D, F, and so are the bass clef lines. What would that look like, and what effect would it have on the staff? So now for this, we're assuming that the treble clef and bass clef have the same notes, just an octave apart. So the lines of the treble clef would be E, G, B, D, F, and the lines of the bass clef would also be E, G, B, D, F. Let's see what happens. So if F is now the top note in the bass clef, where would middle C be? Well, normally it would be here, right? And now middle C is actually here, 2 ledger lines above the bass clef. However, since the treble clef has remained the same, and that bottom line is E, middle C would be right here. So we have middle C right where it normally is, but now middle C for the bass clef is now here. And now we have this whole mess of inconsistent spacing. While it may seem like a good idea to have the same lines and spaces between each clef, on the sheet music, it's actually going to make things more confusing because now middle C is different from the treble clef as it is from the bass clef, which would make it even harder to count notes and figure out where you are from the staff to the sheet music. So I have a very important question I want you to answer in the comments. However, I want to go over the conclusions of today's to kind of drive everything home. So here they are. So remember that treble clef and bass clef exist as a standardized way to read music across many instruments: low-pitched instruments, medium-pitched instruments, and higher-pitched instruments, and full-pitched instruments like the piano. And that's so you don't have a different clef for each instrument, which would actually make things a lot harder to understand. And the reason that both clefs do not have the same notes, and they have the notes that they do have, has to do with their positioning around middle C. And if you start messing with that, middle C is going to be in a different spot for one clef than it is for another clef, and that will make things actually more confusing. I know at first you're like, oh man, to memorize it would be so much easier to just remember one set of notes. But trust me, it only takes a few hours to get this right, to memorize the lines and spaces of bass clef, lines and spaces of treble clef. And trust me that it actually makes things more simple than it does make them more complicated. And also, the spacing exists between the clefs because if you had notes go high up in the bass clef towards the middle of the piano, you need that space to basically account for those notes. And if there wasn't that space there, the bass clef notes would actually run into the treble clef. Now, time for the question. Are you ready? So there are weird, unique questions in music, such as, why do both clefs have different notes? Like, what's the difference between 3/4 and 3/8 time signature? Things like that. And if you have a question on your mind like that you've always wondered, let me know in the comments. It would really help me with a future video that I'm working on. And now time for the final tip as promised. So if you want to truly master reading music, which is essential for mastering any instrument, you're going to have to know how to read music on the staff, how to read intervals, how to recognize patterns instantly in your music. And this lesson right here is going to catch you up on all that stuff. It's called How to Read Music in One Easy Lesson. It's been your piano teacher, Tim, here. Thanks for coming by, and happy practicing.